Yeah, I don't come from the space, but I think industrial design applies to almost every product that you design. So what I've done really in this presentation is look at parallels that I've drawn from the work we've done in India on various categories. Some of them align to public systems, but just a journey of how we can walk through what design intervention can do for transit media. So the first thing that really came symbolically to me on what we had done from a messaging perspective, this is actually a baton that we had designed for the Commonwealth Games, and it is in a way transit media. It is about a message carried from the Queen to the rest of the world and then comes to India on the beginning of the games. So the point I wanted to make here is that the message was the most important part of this whole baton, but it's really important to kind of create a strong symbolic value to the vehicle or the medium of the message. And we created this baton to kind of represent India. We picked soil from each state in India and then kind of created this whole symbolic statement of sport. And in a sense, it was the vehicle for a message, and that message we finally miniaturized to a very small leaf of gold that was inscribed on it. So in a sense, this is broadly what I would say symbolically what design can do for the category. And there are many parts to it. I mean, there's a physical part to transit media, and there's also content, and it's this whole marriage that really brings alive novelty in this category. What I decoded from transit media, I mean, we've not done literally any work in this space, very little, but it's about commuter dynamics, it's about passenger dynamics, and it's about experience. It's not just about communication. And if you break down experience itself, it's about context of attention, and that varies depending on where you interact with a commuter, transit time, and of course viewpoint. Viewpoint is a big challenge in this space, and that's something that technology does address today. How do we create a framework for design in this space? Like I said, I think there are two big parts to it. There's content design. I think content is doing a marvelous job on how do you interpret brand messages. But the big part that's really missing in India is this whole physical design context of these installations. And that's something that you walk into a street in Europe, you're amazed by the bus stand and the signage and every little detail that's there. And that's what we aspire to at least bring to India. And that's one of the reasons that I started looking at public spaces as an area of design intervention. So I'm taking a very odd example. I think this is a message carrier. This is the Java that we had worked on, which was launched in December last year. We created the touch points that created the connect with the brand. And it wasn't about changing the shape of the bike, but it's about those small little details that go into a bike. Every little element brings back the message that this is the Java. And whether it's the badging on the tank, whether it's the fuel cap that's been re-innovated, or the storytelling that you build onto the engine tank, tachymeter. The point I'm making here is that it's about creating a range of touch points that really connect with the consumer. And it's not just that entire one piece, it's everything that you kind of do in it. So the approach to transit media, at least what I believe, is it's not about single elements, the isolated elements, it's about a unified approach to touch points of communication. And that unified approach can let you define the true value of what you need to do for each of the touch points that a consumer sees. And if you look at it from that perspective, there's a lot of innovation that can actually open up. Semantics is a big part. Semantics, aesthetics, beauty. And I think we missed this point and we kind of just assume that it's about the content that's coming on a screen or on a surface. And I think the bigger point is when you see a surface like a dial, this is the edge that I'd done some time back, and it was a good perspective of a face that tells you time, but the rest of it actually tells you what the product is all about. So you're actually romanticizing the story of slimness, but you're talking time. So in that sense, you're combining a certain amount of tangible aesthetics to a product, but it's a messaging medium. So if you apply that principle to spaces, to public areas, transit points, airports, railway stations, I mean, there's an amazing lot of things that you can do, whether it's the seating systems that have messaging, communication, passageways, transit points. Every little element, if the whole idea of messaging and aesthetics is just married together, it will just transform the way you see communication. And the challenge here is that if you see a wrap on a bus that is really beaten up and badly finished, it just rubs off on the messaging of that brand. And I think they go completely hand in hand, and you just can't do one without the other. This is a category that's opening up in India, and I think how do you brand these points? It's important to kind of get companies that are manufacturing these formats, these devices, smartly brand them so there's a strong connect, not just to the messaging on that product, but also to who and how they make these products. So the quality of what you represent is in the way you brand it. And good examples of the automotive industry and how they smartly brand, tag products without affecting the overall aesthetics of the overall product. This is something that we've done for Mahindra Electric. So this badge really goes on to any product that is electric in terms of platform. The messaging from a brand perspective, I mean, if you look at liveries and apply the same principles, you can start looking at design that doesn't interfere with communication, but creates a visual story that goes back and connects to a brand. Sorry, it's not over. So if you look at the characteristics of transit media, the big part is it's given technology is evolving, is dynamic, and it's about constantly changing consumer types. I mean, who sits in that seat changes by the hour and by the minute and by the day. And I think these are challenges that we need to address from a design standpoint. There's a shorter attention span. A lot of the media that we see in spaces that you spend a certain amount of time, say in a plane, at the back of the seat, is something that you can't spend enough time with, and it tends to just blend in with the rest of the interiors. And these are the points that really need to come alive with design intervention. So design language, I think, is something that we should look at if you are designing a range and series of devices or touch points that create communication. And I think it's a good case in point is products that use it. Products use it so that you don't rely on the brand name, but you rely on just the visual identity of the product. Apple does it very well with their phones, laptops. You just have to see it from a distance and you know that's the brand. And if you can do that with transit media in terms of the way the fixtures are designed, that itself is a powerful tool to connect back to companies that are actually creating a certain level of quality in that space. We've done this for water filters. You can see the whole thing of a water flow is what we've carried, but the design intent completely changes. Watches do a lot of that. I mean, the whole idea of creating lifestyle statements is a big part of timepiece design. And again, analogies that can apply completely to this category itself. And there is a lot of design intervention that can create a lot of character with product. I mean, the same with navigation as well. It just opens up a completely different way of looking at this category. So the point on those is to kind of look at how we can craft a visual style. It's important to do that, and it's not about singular elements, but it's more about being able to create a connect between all the elements that you design that a commuter or a passenger has an intervention with. And there is a phenomenon called a frequency illusion. It's about creating recognizable shapes and forms that when you start seeing in certain ways, you start seeing more of it through. So if you flip that and then use that as applying it for visual style, you can actually get consumers to spot your media format in a very smart, subliminal manner. And that helps link messaging not within one space, but you can actually link messaging across various formats as well. The other part is if you can expand to embedding functionality into objects, that itself can open up a lot of other interesting formats. This is a seating system we've done for streets in Bangalore. We're actually looking at manufacturing that now. We found that the interesting thing is that the context of India is it's a lot more a crowded space. You have to look at short footprints. So you start smartly thinking of how we can look at seating. And if you just evolve this to something that embeds technology in it, It allows you to create a surface that can communicate to consumers, and then when not in use, is either a navigation or signage point. When it's in use, it's a seat that just counterweights itself down. So you can start creating far more interesting, engaging formats of communication by just embedding functionality in a very interesting manner. Navigation at airports, I mean, the seating systems, depending on what is being used, you can actually combine your functionalities to kind of create a very useful object out of a simple, mundane product. Advertising itself, this is something that's counterweighted. You can push it down to sit, but when you're not sitting on it, it's just a little brand space that allows you to communicate in very, very short footprint spaces. So railway stations is a great place for something like this. Functionality again, I mean, just embedding, this is symbolic, but it's embedding duality of functionality. And the more you build this principle, you can come up with some interesting methods of creating formats of communication. If it's just the seating systems in cars where we look at how we can embed further functionality, most people are on the go today. If I can look at not communication, but look at how I can increase the person's ability to work in a car, I can connect that to communication and create a completely new product that can be embedded into cars today. This is again symbolic. I mean, the fact that you need lighting, but design really creates an expression. And it's this connect that what we need to bring to transit media is design can play a big role in creating expressions that are far more elevated than what we currently see. Coming down to a couple of slides and a few which are a little more sculptural, but again to make a point on how do we create character and personality in messaging. This is something that we've done for a roundabout at the airport in Bangalore, and we took the idea of Flowers of Bangalore and we said, let's not just push branding of that a company that hired the space, but look at how we can kind of combine the thought of the Bangalore airport being about sustainability, about nature. So we took Flowers of Bangalore and created this lighting installation that changes color based on a palette of flower colors of Bangalore. And then within that embed the messaging of the brand. And this again is an expression of what can be done in infinite ways depending on the kind of communication that you drive. Even hoarding spaces, billboards, I mean, it's important to kind of create the right integration into the space and not have them, almost obstructive. It's about making it more seamlessly integrated and not really standing out completely. So I think here we keep focusing on the media space, and it's important to illustrate the fact that it's not just that space, but it's the entire experience that really transforms what a consumer sees of that media space. It's about everything there. So it's about this is a bus stand that we've done for Delhi, which is yet to be rolled out. But the idea is to kind of look at how we can create passenger convenience and then take passenger convenience as the reason to create additional experiences there. So we've done a smart clock that gives you predictive time of, say, weather and when a little ahead in time. So you know when I get back to this bus stop, this is where the weather will be. So you start looking at being sensitive to a consumer's needs and then start implanting the right messaging into it. The same with the seating system. I mean, keep it very simple. And like I said, I mean, messaging that really helps communicate better to consumer by understanding and being sensitive to them. So this is the last bit. I mean, the whole message here is that it's about the whole. It's not about that surface. And I think the moment you do that, you start looking at the entire platform of design for transit media and not really about that particular real estate that you're trying to sell. Technology is another thing that's doing a lot in terms of intervention, and technology and industrial design combined together can give you a whole range of interesting executions of media. A far better control on deployment of messaging, as well as far more integrated systems into commuter experiences, whether it's converting a window into a polarized glass that can be used as a screen versus a whole range of other things that can really bring alive a seamless experience for commuters. Quick example of how we attempted that as a digital installation where we created, it was a media expression wall, but what we said is let's create this as a lighting installation. So what it does is it by software picks up colors on the screen and allows that entire installation to live the images that are on the screen. So you don't see it as just as a bland screen that tells you information, but it's a lighting installation that engages with you. And these start transforming the way you even experience messaging. So the last bit is we need to innovate on formats. I mean, formats of expression of communication. This is something that we've now prototyping. It's a lighting installation that comes alive with messages every minute or every second, and it's designed as simple we've combined technology and light with this as a very interesting installation that connects to a feed that allows you to, for example, if there's a chess match happening in Bangalore, it transforms itself in a few seconds. If there's some news that really appears, it becomes a medium for you to communicate, but as a very different format. So this, I think, is the last slide. So the point is that I think there's a huge scope in India, and I think India's to be seen from an India context, and we don't need to implant things from other countries to kind of see how they apply here. And the moment we do that, the world is completely open to what we can do. The big challenge is quality and execution. I think that's something that if married well with smart design, you can come up with something very interesting in this space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. I think you talked not just about content. I think the format itself is very important. And where the format locates itself in that environment, that also needs to be looked at. I think some very interesting takeaways. And one very interesting thing is that, and the last point that you made was that I think we can create all these things in our country. We don't have to really look at inspiration from the overseas. And you've already done it. And I didn't quite realize that you're already there in the media space. And I hope that you spend more time in this industry as well. The floor is open to questions. Well, I think it's been just mesmerizing. I think you've just mesmerized the audience with your designs. But I just have one question, Mike. Is that very often there is a mindset as to, to look good, to do something good, there is a significant cost attached to that. So what is your experience and what is your thought on that as to, is cost an inhibiting factor in looking great?
I think there are two ways to look at it. If you look at long-term investment, you can address per unit cost far better. So we've been pushing the whole idea of don't craft chairs for that one piece, but look at a million chairs and then look at the process that applies to a million chairs. And that itself breaks down the cost of per product far lower. And you can apply that to any of the transit media space. If you look at crafting them for scale versus crafting them for singular units. And I think that's the shift that has to happen to get a cost down per unit.
Michael, I think there's a challenge out there is that I think you work a lot in the retail industry, as I understand, where scale is very natural to that business. When it comes to out of home, that scale that you get to see in retail may not be there because here the ownership is fairly fragmented. So it's not necessary that a person may be owning very large number of units and that you can achieve economy of scale. So what is the alternative in that case?
I think it's processes can allow you to create reasonably low cost. I think low cost has to be seen from the perspective of what quality you're achieving, and the lowest cost is never the benchmark. And typically what happens in India is that becomes the benchmark and then everything else is more expensive. So I think one is the perception change of what needs to be done to arrive at the right quality. And the second is to look at smart ways of looking at small runs of production that still don't hold you down on large costs. So there are a lot of processes that I think it's a lot of, you need to look at the problem differently, and there's definitely solutions around creating that.
Fantastic. I think it's been a wonderful session. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks.
I think we will want to hear more and more from you in the OH space.